Welcome everyone to the second in a series of 3 Startup Know-How panel discussions for the spring 2021 semester, offered by Isles Venture Development in collaboration with the UMass Amherst Technology Transfer Office. Today's topic is securing your seed round. I am Lisa Korpieski, the Director of Communications and Marketing here at the Institute for Applied Life Sciences. And I just want to go over a few housekeeping items. The seminar is being recorded, as you just heard. If you miss any part of this panel discussion or would like to forward it to someone who could not attend, there will be a replay of this and all previous seminars in this series on our website. I recommend you set your view mode to speaker. Please stay muted during the talks. And next, I would like to introduce you to our moderator, Charlie Johnson, who comes to us from the Isenberg School of Management and Maroon Venture Partners. Charlie?
So good afternoon, everybody. Great to have everybody on board. And I'd like to begin by having each of our panelists briefly introduce themselves, and then we'll get right to work. So Jennifer Griffin, greetings.
Hello, I'm Jennifer. I'm currently the VP of Strategy Investments at the Massachusetts Life Sciences Center. And I am a scientist by training. I have a PhD from UMass Medical School, also a UMass Amherst graduate, go UMass. And I've spent about 10 years after my PhD away from the bench working with early stage startups in a variety of capacities, including consulting as a strategy consultant, as well as structuring and negotiating licenses at MIT to MIT startups. And now I run a seed fund at the Mass Life Sciences Center, making early stage investments in the form of a convertible note to life science companies exclusively. As well as a mentoring program for women entrepreneurs, where we also make small, non-dilutive grant investments. So happy to be here. Thank you.
Jennifer, thanks, and good to have you. Liz.
Hey, I'm Liz. I'm currently a Director of Impact Investments at MassMutual, and my main focus is on the new Catalyst Fund, the MassMutual Catalyst Fund, a $50 million fund making direct investments in companies based in Massachusetts. We have 2 sleeves of funding, 25 million that's focused on making direct investments into Black owned and led companies across the Commonwealth. And then another 25 million looking at founders and companies of all stripes outside of Boston. So putting that catalytic capital into underserved parts of the state. My background is varied. I'm a former entrepreneur myself, built and sold a couple small tech companies in New York City before moving to Western Mass for the good life about 10 years ago, and taught entrepreneurship at Smith, built an accelerator here, did a few other things, and just landed in my current role at MassMutual this January to start this new fund. Glad to be here.
Great to have you. Matt Whitehead.
Hey everyone, I'm Matt Whitehead. I'm a corporate partner at Feinberg, Hanson, a small corporate boutique law firm in Boston. And I routinely work with startups and investors on pre-seed, seed, and all types of lettered round financings.
Great, good to have you. And I'm Charlie Johnson. I teach entrepreneurship and business ethics at the Isenberg School. And I'm also the managing director of a small seed fund, Maroon Ventures, that invests in UMass Amherst linked companies, and I'm also one of 5 people on the investment committee. So this conversation today is about seed funding, and just so that we all have the lay of the land, let's make sure that we understand what is seed funding. Liz, maybe I could start with you.
Sure. I mean, it's a broad umbrella and it depends who you ask. But basically, it's once you've proven, if your company's still at concept for a lot of reasons, you've got enough traction and you can't take it any further without some outside capital. And there are a lot of different kinds of capital, equity capital, what we, in financing, what we're offering at the MassMutual Catalyst Fund, although we hope to do some revenue-based investment in the near term, is the most expensive seed capital you can have because we take a piece of your company in exchange for it. But there can be seed capital that can come in the form of grants, that can come in the form of debt, all sorts of other ways. But you have a clear idea where your money is going to go and how it's going to make more money, or you're going to pay it back, is the simplest way. So to take something from raw ideation to you have steps worked out and a series of experiments you can do, because you don't always know the answer, that's going to make a result to report back to your investor or your grantee or whoever's providing that capital, to be able to see those measurable outcomes and ultimately, lead to customers and revenue.
So if I need funding for my company, why can't I just go directly to a venture capitalist? Why do I have to make a stop along the way to the so-called seed funding? Matt?
Yeah, so venture capitalists or VCs they're kind of the next step after you have more of a proven concept. And pre-seed or seed funding, it can come in all different flavors. And I primarily work on the equity financing side of the equation. And this means that you'd be raising funds through angel investors, friends, family, maybe advisors who you're close with and may have a network. And kind of at this stage, at an early stage, before your concept has been proven or before you have traction, it's kind of more based on a belief in the team and the belief in your mission moving forward. And VCs kind of enter the picture, maybe 6 or 12 or 18 months following this preliminary seed round.
So I was going to turn to Jennifer, but I think that she just had to go let the cat out. So maybe I'll jump in. And there's Jennifer. So
I'm sorry, my dogs were.
I said the cat.
Sorry,
I knew it either had to be a cat or a dog. So when we're talking about the seed funding, how much are we talking about? What in dollars?
Yeah, it really depends on the sector and what type of product you're developing. My expertise comes from the life sciences, so drug development, med tech, diagnostics. And even with that, it's quite the range. You can imagine that if you're developing a pharmaceutical product, you need quite a bit of capital to get there. And so a seed round can be, in the millions easy. If you're a digital health technology company, you can be a little more lean with your capital. And so maybe $500,000 can do the trick. But those are typically the sizes that I'm participating in at the Mass Life Sciences Center. And they're typically enough for a year, 2 years maybe. Really, as Liz started to speak to earlier, to kind of get you to that next value inflection point, which is really another way of saying de-risking your technology and your company one more step so that you can really draw down that risk for follow-on venture capitalists.
All right. And you're not going to be able to keep me from weighing in on these things, if I may. I might add one other thing. If I've got $100 million venture capital fund, I would rather make 20 $5 million investments than 100 $1 million investments. Why? Because 100 investments is a lot to manage. And every time as a venture capitalist, every time I invest in a company, I've got to keep my eye on it. Maybe I got to sit on the board of directors. I've got to report out to my own investors on the company's progress. I got to send out K1s, all of that kind of stuff. So there's just a bandwidth issue. And but not every startup company is ready to absorb a $5 million investment. And also, as has been indicated, most venture capitalists are looking for a little bit of traction. So that seed fund gets you closer to a position where you can take that larger investment. And I think, to me, that's an important part of it as well. All right, so we had a number of very good questions from our studio audience, and I've tried to massage them and construct them in a way so that we try to hit many of the points that people were curious about. And certainly one of them is getting ready for a seed investment. And I recognize that, it depends because all these different companies come in different flavors. But I wonder if there are any key inflection points that we ought to be thinking about as entrepreneurs that can be indicators that we're ready for a seed investment. Who wants to take this one? Jennifer, you want to start?
Sure, happy to. So, in my world, someone who's pitching to me for seed money needs to check several boxes, right? So they need to have a clear concept of their technology and their product. If it's something like a medical device, there needs to be some type of prototype. It doesn't have to be perfect, but there needs to be something physically there that someone else who has expertise has weighed in on. So, in our world, can you get it in the hands of a physician, or can you get at least the opinion of a physician who might be using it to weigh in on its attributes, even if you don't have a full working prototype? I think you need to have an understanding of your market opportunity, of who finds this valuable. And that can be defined in a lot of ways. So obviously you want to talk about patients. Is this addressing a clinical unmet need? Sorry, all my comments are probably going to be life science specific, but if it's your end user or your customer, why is this of value to them? What are you selling? Is it really solving some type of unmet need? And then, that could be a very large number, but it also helps if you've narrowed it down to really understand specifically which, in my world, patient population or customer segment you're really, really focused on. And that just shows an understanding of you understand the market and the nuance associated with it, and it informs how you're going to get to that market. You don't have to have all those details worked out, but I need to be convinced that you've really thought about this more than, sleeping on it for a few nights. And you can walk through your team. You might not have a full team built out. You probably don't, but you have an understanding of what you know and what your team knows and what they don't, and how you're going to, round that out. Who are you going to go to for advice? You might not have a full board, but you have advisors who are willing to offer some free advice, take a look at your business plan occasionally, and help weigh in. And I think, it always helps if you have a little bit of interest from another investor. And I know that's sort of a catch-22 because you're just getting ready to go out to investors. But it also really strengthens your pitch when you say, Maroon 5 actually is interested. I've had one preliminary conversation. That really pipes my interest.
By the way, our fund is Maroon Venture Partners. Maroon 5 is kind of
that's a music group.
Yeah. So
sorry,
I don't sing. All right. So Liz, what I hear Jennifer saying is that it needs to be more than something that a cool idea that I've developed in the lab. That I've got to really figure out how are we going to make money from this, and is this a real commercial business, or is this just a cool idea? Is that a fair takeaway?
Yeah, I think definitely, often say, the idea is 1%, the execution is 99%, right? And I think people tend to go to investors too soon when they have an idea and they say, well, if I had the money, then I'll be able to figure out all those other things, right? And that might be true, but you'd probably spend a lot of the money the wrong way, and it would be the investor's money, right? And so making sure that you have a concrete plan, understanding of unit metrics, understanding of the market, that the problem you're solving, right, and for who, and whether it's a product or a service, that those people are going to be willing to pay for that at that price, and there's enough people willing to pay for that price to create a real business. So just sort of the basic sculpting of what it looks like almost like wireframing it out beyond just the idea, what's going to happen. And we're a little different at the Impact Fund in that we're incredibly consultative. We're happy to be the first check-in. We're happy to do that work, especially with our underestimated entrepreneurs we're targeting that aren't getting some of the same access to the startups in Boston or otherwise, to startup services. So we really want to understand how are you thinking about this, kind of come around to the other side of the screen with them. What are you thinking about in your business? What does it look like? What are you, because often entrepreneurs are physically brilliant people in a very specific expertise, but they might not have the business acumen, vernacular, those sorts of things, but how they're thinking about it, it's taking that time to kind of break it down. So we have an open online application for our fund. And so we get a lot of different kinds of companies coming in at different stages, even though we write the really clear criteria. People, and I respect it, apply anyway. And so I really put them in the buckets of not yets, right? And so we're happy to start relationships with people before they're ready and give them targets. And I love the companies who come back, right? Here's what you haven't done. And they come back, and those become some of the best investments from my experience. And it's important to build a relationship. It's important for the entrepreneurs to know, is this a working relationship with an investor I want? And is for us to know, is this entrepreneur discerning yet coachable, right? How do they answer questions? How do they follow through? So I think there's something really key to that relationship building over time. So it's a, to Jennifer's point, it's a slippery slope of don't go too soon, don't go too late. How do you approach? But I think creating those touch points and relationships matter.
And Matt, how about you? Inflection points. You sit down with a lot of entrepreneurs and coach them. What are some inflection points that we might not have addressed that you might consider?
Yeah, I'd say from the legal perspective, when starting to consider engaging in this type of discussion with outside investors, it's really important to make sure that your corporate house is in order. And what I mean by that is in a startup's earliest stages, there's sometimes what I find is entrepreneurs it kind of let the legal side of things just kind of sit on the back burner.
Matt, do I need to have formed a company in order to talk to Liz or to the Maroon 5 or Jennifer? I'm changing our name, by the way. I like Maroon 5 a lot better.
I don't know that it's 100% necessary, but I think that I think when you're at that point, when you're positioned to start to go out to market, I think that there are benefits to having your company formed and to, internally with your other co-founders to be on the same page with respect to how are we allocating equity. Let's make sure that we have our documentation signed up so there's no dispute down the line. And it's one thing to kind of all roughly be on the same page in terms of ownership percentages, but once you start talking actual money from investors, sometimes people can change, and money can change people, and so it's important to just have all of that finalized and just have the stock issued, make sure it's done properly, everyone's subject to a vesting schedule, make sure that everyone has assigned their IP to the company so that everyone understands that these investors will be investing in the company and they're not investing in any one individual.
Right. And of course, we're not selling NFTs, right? We're selling shares of stock. And so we've got to form a company to have something that we have a currency to issue to investors. So one of the interesting questions that we got, and I love the way that it's expressed, they asked, what are the green lights for dealing with investors? And Liz, if I were to ask you, and I know this is a hard question, but if you were to identify one thing that really sticks out to you as something that you love to see with an an entrepreneur that comes to you looking for funding, what might that green light be?
Again, that's sort of an it depends, because of course it's a lot easier for me if they're established. They've got perfect financial projections that are logical, that map to unit metrics. They've got a stellar, board existing already, a round of funding, or half their fund secured. I'm just finishing it or closing it, right? Like that's sort of the perfect scenario of they've made my job so simple, right? But that's not very realistic. I mean, or it is, it's a wonderful thing, but what are the point of our funding is to be really catalytic. So helping, put funding into the hands of people who aren't getting it, right? Typically, or being overlooked or filtered out by the status quo VC system. So that's not the cases that are typically coming our way. So I'd say a green light, again, it's usually not the first meeting, right? It's a series of meetings. It's the follow-up. Something as simple as we have a meeting and you follow up. It's amazing how many people don't. And you really give them sort of specifics and make it easy for them to kind of demonstrate, because so much of what you're judging in these early stage companies is the founder, right? Every action they take, everything they do, how they communicate, their professionalism, their follow through is an indicator about the viability of the company and what they're saying they can do. If they can't follow up on an email or think of that, how are they going to secure customers? How are they going to do everything else, right? And so that's just the simplest one, I would say, that everyone should be able to achieve and think about.
Yeah, I mean, what you just said reminds me of something that Mark Andreessen, who is a very prominent Silicon Valley investor, has said that what he really looks for is, what is it in this team that makes them uniquely qualified to really be able to pursue this opportunity? I mean, team market fit. And certainly that's something that is thought about a lot. Jennifer, how about you? What's the green light that really gets folks, past go with you?
Yeah, it's a lot of the same. It's when there's a certain confidence in an entrepreneur without the cockiness, quite frankly. So there's a self-awareness to know, I don't know everything. And we end up investing in a lot of first-time entrepreneurs. So you have to be sort of aware of what you don't know and open to the coaching and the feedback that we're going to provide you, even in the first pitch. And I think, just like Liz said, taking some of those critiques in that first pitch and following up with emails saying that, okay, I've thought great points. Here's some thoughts, or here's who I spoke to get some more info on that. And just showing that initiative and determination. I mean, back to an earlier question, the sweat equity that you put in as a founder is so important. And it tells me a lot about your seriousness behind this, how committed you are, your determination, because it's going to be a long haul, especially in the life sciences. And, if I'm not confident that you can navigate at least the first several years of that, there's no way you're going to get a green light. And so for me, that's sort of the type of person that I love to invest in.
Okay, so I'm a enthusiastic entrepreneur, and I'm very coachable, and I'm excited about my idea, and I think that there's a great market opportunity. But and I had a really good time listening to this conversation today, and I now know I need to go get seed funding, but I got to figure out where to go. So I'm happy to have met Liz today. I'm happy to have met Jennifer today. Matt's a lawyer. He's probably rich. He can probably write out a big check. But Matt, where do I go? I mean, how do I figure out how to meet these people?
Yeah, and this is always a difficult question. And I think the first place that you start is just in your network. Who do you know who has done this before, and
So
who do you
Matt,
know?
and let me jump in, because are we talking about wealthy individuals? Are we talking? I understand I'm not ready for a venture capital fund. So are these rich people? Who are they? Where do they live?
With respect to an angel investment round, is that what you're?
A seed fund.
Sure. So
a seed round. Say I got to raise $250,000.
Right. So in that case, it usually would be wealthy individuals, or there are some targeted funds that specialize in smaller investments, but usually that's a bit more upstream. And, these types of a $250,000 to a $500,000 round would mostly be comprised of wealthy individuals who have, a history of making these types of investments. It could be some advisors who, sit on a number of advisory boards and invest in the different companies they represent.
And how do I find these folks? I mean, do I just go to LinkedIn or go to the Forbes list of the 100 wealthiest people in Massachusetts and try to find their name on LinkedIn and go to them? Does my lawyer help me meet them? Does my accountant? Does my professor? What do I do?
Honestly, it's kind of a mix of all of the above. And I think that most lawyers and accountants and bankers and professors and outside advisors would have some ability to make some connections. And I don't think there's any one source, one individual who can kind of open all of these doors for you. I think it's kind of a combination. And I think it's just the more touches that you get with, the more people, it's just helpful. And I think other sources are great too. I think, investors they're active on LinkedIn, they're active on Twitter. And I think that, they're receptive to receiving DMs. And, I do think that's another strategy, but I think it's
a DM. What's a DM?
Just sending a direct message to someone and say, hey, look, this is my company, this is our idea, and just kind of, being direct about it. And I don't think that's the only strategy that one can use, but I think that it's when used together with, these other sources, I think you can piece it together, and you just, introductions are made, and someone may not be able to help out, but they know someone else who's interested in investing in the space. Maybe you have a friend who started another startup and they've raised some capital, and you can get in with sometimes what's helpful is if you can find an entry point to a syndicate of angels, that can really open doors where you have these angel investor groups where there's dozens or hundreds of angels associated with or affiliated with this group, with a particular angel group. And if you can find your way into that group, and you get, pique the interest of one or two prominent investors there, you'll have the opportunity to present for a number of these different affiliates. So,
okay, great. Jennifer, do you want to add to this? Where do I go?
Yeah, so I would not undervalue your peers. So, other entrepreneurs, as you immerse yourself in sort of the entrepreneurial networks of wherever you are, IELTS Center, et cetera, out at UMass Amherst School of Management, you're going to meet other people who are doing what you're doing. And one of the things that we learned when we built a program to support women entrepreneurs in the life sciences was the cohort themselves of entrepreneurs provided a tremendous amount of support and networking and introductions. I spoke to this investor, they weren't interested, but you might want to think about them. Here's one of my actual investors. You might think to speaking with them is helpful. There's a lot of support from your own peers. And I also think looking at your competition, knowing who is raising money for something similar to what you're doing is often an interesting place to start as well.
Okay, Liz?
Yeah, I think all the points that Matt and Jennifer made were great. But I'd also just kind of even back it up. Have you exhausted all your other options before going to investors? Right. I mean, I think, raising an equity round, or it's very exciting, or, I see a lot of entrepreneurs, I want to raise $1 million. Why? Well, because that seems like a cool thing to do. Right. What have you done if you're could you do crowdfunding? Right? Could you, if it's a product or service, could you do pre-sales on Kickstarter? then you don't need any seed funding, right? You're actually selling direct to customers ahead of time. If you're going to go to Jennifer and you're a life science company, have you already applied to, and you're in the research and development phase, right? Have you already applied to SBIRs? Have you done the I-Corps program with Karen? Have you, applied for other kind of creative grant funding opportunities, right? Just making sure you've exhausted all of these other possibilities. One, because equity funding is expensive, right? And what do you really need to get further? And two, you're going to have an easier time raising and you're going to get a better valuation if you found a way to get more traction, to get closer or more revenue or bootstrap or some of those things on your own. So I would start with that and really educate yourself on the kind of capital, because that changes your trajectory. It changes your life, right? All of those things. What do you want for your business? What do you want for your life should be the kind of capital you're raising. And I think that's really important. There's a cool tool on Community Loan Fund, New Hampshire Community Loan Fund. It's called a Capital Compass. And it's just this free thing. And it puts you through a series of questions that you answer. And if you can't answer these questions, you're not ready for any kind of funding. But you go through and you answer these, and then on these goofy little dials, the UI is pretty low tech, but it sort of gives you like a green or red or yellow for debt, equity, royalty. So it just gives you a sense on what those opportunities are and what you should even be looking at, like what kind of seed funding this should be. So I think just really making sure you've educated yourself on those things first.
Right. So if I could just add a few things. One of the reasons we started the Maroon Fund is getting that $250,000 is really hard. Wealthy individuals are hard because they tend to invest in people. If they're a wealthy individual, they probably know a bunch of entrepreneurs trying to do stuff. And they tend to invest in people that they know and that they have prior relationships with. So it's hard to go to your lawyer or your accountant and say, well, you must know a bunch of wealthy individuals, introduce me to them, because they're less inclined to invest in people they don't have a relationship with. So as Matt suggests, building relationships with those folks is important. One thing that does help is to find wealthy individuals who understand your sector. So if I just sold my medical device company, I might be inclined to invest in another medical device company because I know that sector, and I might be able to not only write a $50,000 check or $100,000 check, but I'd like to be helpful to young entrepreneurs, and maybe I can provide some value added. Also, as Matt suggested, there are these angel groups. So in Boston, there's Launchpad, there's Hub Angels. In the Pioneer Valley, there's River Valley Investors. And these are groups of wealthy individuals who like to invest actively. They typically meet on a monthly basis. Typically 3 companies will pitch to them, and then they'll ask the entrepreneurs to leave, and the 20 to 25 people in the room tend to talk amongst themselves about what they think, and they might sort of literally pass the hat and see who might be interested in investing in the company. Somebody just asked a question on the chat about crowdfunding, and as Liz suggested, crowdfunding is fabulous. And so, and they come in different flavors. So Kickstarter and Indiegogo are sites where the investor doesn't acquire an equity interest in your company, but they're acquiring your product. And so suppose I'm going to do a movie, and Kickstarter sort of started as a site for artists. So if I'm going to make a movie and you contribute $25, then when I make the movie, I'll send you a copy of the movie. If you invest, $500, maybe I'll name you in the credit to my movie. And if you invest $1,000 or $5,000, maybe I'll even give you a cameo role in my movie. So it's a rewards-based program. There are other crowdfunding sites where you actually own an equity, you acquire an equity interest in the company. And it's set up so that it can be a collection of very, very small investments. I mean, people can invest $1,000 on one of these websites, and Angel List is a good one. Circle Up is another one that's quite popular. And, you know, if you do a Google search of crowdfunding sites, you can get a pretty good list of what the active crowdfunding sites are. But that's certainly a way to raise money. You're not going to raise huge amounts of money, but it's certainly a way to, you know, raise $100,000. And certainly with Kickstarter, it also has the benefit of getting some market validation of interest in your product. And also maybe you'll find some evangelists and people will tell their friends, and you'll maybe start a bit of a network effect. So something like Kickstarter is a wonderful idea. All right. So, Matt, I want to turn to you. We've got a number of questions about lawyers. And I've got to find a lawyer for my venture. And how do I go about not only finding a lawyer, but how do I vet a lawyer to ensure that I've got somebody who's a good fit for my business?
You know, from my perspective, I think that, you know, an entrepreneur can view their lawyer as more than just someone who's executing on legal documents. You really want to view your lawyer as a trusted advisor, someone who is going to be with you for a long time and can advise with respect to your early formation, can advise on your fundraising, can advise on, you know, now you have some interesting commercial contracts, and someone who can kind of look 5 steps ahead and kind of always be comprehensively evaluating your situation. And it's a difficult thing to determine when just, you know, looking someone up online or having a quick free consult with someone. It's you know, I don't know that there's a surefire way of figuring out who would be the best lawyer or law firm to work with. I mean, a good starting point is to talk with other friends and fellow entrepreneurs and see, you know, who they're working with. And you know, there's different types of firms that have different specialties. And, you know, maybe you're an entrepreneur that wants to work with the biggest firm in Boston, or maybe you'd prefer to work with a boutique like the one that I'm with. And you know, I think you receive, you know, there's different value propositions that each type of firm and different lawyers can offer. And it's kind of just a balancing act as to where you fit on that spectrum in terms of cost and, you know, responsiveness and, you know, personalized attention, you know, experience with different types of transactions. And do you want someone who specializes in one particular field, or someone who has broad-based experience and can draw upon that in different applications? So it's kind of just measuring all of those factors.
Okay.
But, you know, the starting point is a difficult one. And it's, you know, I think it's talking with your professors, talking with fellow entrepreneurs, and then just reaching out, because most lawyers will, you know, give at least a free half hour to discuss with you, if not longer, to just, you know, feel each other out, see if it's a good fit, and take it from there. So it's kind of an interview process in a way.
Okay, so that's helpful. So if I might add one thing along those lines, lawyers have bios on their websites. So you certainly want to look at the bio and see the nature of the work that they do. And oftentimes on those websites, they will list sort of representative transactions. And they'll say that I work with venture capitalists, or I do this or that. But one thing that you might consider is just to go a little bit further and ask when they did those transactions. Because, you know, what sometimes happens is people might describe, you know, having represented some entrepreneurs in a venture capital transaction, and yeah, they did that, but it was like 10 or 12 years ago. So you might say, ask, for instance, how many seed investment transactions have you represented entrepreneurs in the last 24 months? And then who were those transactions with? And, if they've done 6 or 8 of these transactions over the last year to 24 months, that it's somebody who's pretty active in doing this kind of work. But if you get kind of a long pause and, I did that 8 years ago, that also tells you something. So that might be a good question for you to ask. All right, another great question. Protecting intellectual property. And Burnley, I know you're on here, and I may ask you to take put the camera on. There you are. So we might ask you to weigh in on this too. So actually, let me go right to you, Burnley. There was a question about if that's okay. Is that okay with the rules, Karen? Can I go to Burnley? Okay. So Burnley heads our tech transfer office at UMass, very ably, I might add. And so I'm an entrepreneur and I want to go out and talk to some seed investors. But I'm concerned that somebody might steal my idea, or should I be worried about that? How do I protect myself?
Yeah, I think you want to think about patent protection before you go out and start talking about your idea. And if it's a university technology, then we can help with that. But if it's your company's technology, not a university technology, then you can, find there's lots of good patent attorneys out there that can help you with that.
Okay. Matt, is there anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I'd say, kind of alluded to this earlier. You want to make sure that all of your co-founders and all employees, everyone has assigned their IP to the company. There's kind of standard form agreements that we use to facilitate that, and signed up confidentiality agreements. But something to be aware of that surprises many entrepreneurs is that for early stage financings, the investors are not going to really entertain signing an NDA, and it comes as a surprise because you say, well, geez, I have to disclose the secret sauce here, but I'm putting a lot of trust in this investor, and that's unfortunately part of the game. And every now and then someone will sign one, and it kind of surprises me when that does happen.
And why won't investors sign NDAs? I mean, why is that unreasonable?
Well, the reason is because they are presented with so many opportunities to review other different companies, and it's difficult for someone, particularly in the earliest stages where you're meeting with so many different people, to administer that type of framework where you're subject to these confidentiality restrictions with dozens and dozens and dozens of companies. And it changes a little bit as you go upstream, and once you get to growth equity and C+ rounds, things are a little different. But early stages, you're just not going to get that type of protection. And
isn't it fair too that they care about their reputations?
That's kind of what you can rest your hat on, and you can still be comfortable disclosing, because to the extent that an investor ever violated that confidentiality, that implied confidentiality, it would completely tarnish their reputation. And most investors do this, either professionally, or it represents a significant portion of what they're actively doing. So no one wants that bad rep.
Okay. So Liz, you mentioned along the way other sources of non-dilutive funding. So what are some of those?
Sure. So there's, sort of grants, right? Government, SBA grants, SBI. are, Karen could probably list through these much more eloquently than I can. There's also, what you can win from pitch competitions, those sorts of things. Some accelerators are non-dilutive and award cash and programs. So that's one route to go. And then the other things are debt. They're sort of traditionally getting, a line of credit, which is very hard for companies, startups to do, but traditional sort of banking. There's also, some programs like depending on equipment or other things you're getting from like, I believe it's Mass Development is sort of a quasi-state, and Jennifer's nodding. I'll bet she knows a lot more about this, but as hybrid state and private, and they do some really interesting equipment loan things at very low prices. There's a lot of really creative things and government assistance in some of those, more traditional debt-based instruments. And then we also look at something called doing revenue-based investment, but this is for companies a little more established, right? So our sweet spot, where sort of we're targeting, they have to be doing at least 250,000 in annual recurring revenue and have a history and have a healthy margin, so that when you put that money in, it's going to attach to their future revenues, say 2 to 3 years out. But you're getting a more Arthur has a lot to say about revenue investment. This is barking up a storm. But it's better because it's a specific amount of capital and you've got the right metrics to be able to pay it back. And we like it because it's money that becomes faster and a little, in theory, lower risk than some of our other investments as we look at our portfolio. And we also really like it for the founders because it's non-dilutive. So we want them to, be motivated to have more of their company. And it's not instead of an equity round. Sometimes that might be in the future, but it might get them to that important growth rate. And they're still then going in for that equity round with a much larger percentage of their company and a much healthier spot.
And Liz, is it fair to say that if I'm a startup company and I've got very little collateral that I can use to support a bank loan, I may not be able to go to a bank for a traditional bank loan, but if I need to get a piece of equipment, maybe I can get some equipment financing. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and there's also micro lenders, CDFIs, the SBA themselves. The city of Springfield actually offers loans for companies based in Springfield for $15,000, and once you repay the first half, the rest is forgiven. So there's some interesting hybrid things there. And then there's local banks that once you've established some of those credits, some of that track record, that's a little less traditional, they will give you lines of credit that you wouldn't normally get, or you have that first investment check and then don't wait, also get a line of credit from a bank early on when that check is still big, right? Your balance is high, and just to be, smart and clever about it as much as you can. Get some help and take advantage of, there's so many programs, especially in Massachusetts, really looking to support small businesses, entrepreneurs, and growth. There's a lot of structures to look into.
Jennifer, what are we missing in non-dilutive financing?
Well, let's see. Mass Life Sciences is also a quasi, like Mass Development. We offer grant programs for life science companies. So anybody who's developing something that's advancing human health. We have non-dilutive grants, as well as, convertible notes. I think, to echo what Liz was saying, when a company comes in and has an SBIR or STTR, it's also, a sign that they've sort of thought about their technology and their business model enough to at least get through that. And so even if you don't end up getting some of these non-dilutive forms of capital, it always helps you to write down and talk about your plan, your business model, your product, what you're selling, why it's amazing. So I think going through that process is really critical.
Okay. So we just have a few minutes left. I'd like to just hear from each of our panelists. What are some of the unwitting mistakes that well-intentioned entrepreneurs make when they seek this early funding? Who's ready to roll? Liz, you want to start?
Sure, I'm trying to decide which mistake.
And we only have a few minutes, Liz. I mean, we don't have 2 hours for you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'll try to be as concise as possible. One thing that I, when Matt that came up with, I think getting a founders agreement, right? Making sure even if your co-founder is your best friend or you've been in lab together for years, doing that. There's a great book called The Founder's Dilemma. It's a short, pretty simple, and it really gives you context of how to talk about these things with your co-founder, how to have those honest conversations, and sort of along the stage, and then milestones when you should continue to have those, right? And I feel like so many founders start things, a lot of founders, sometimes their spouses that are, in a company together, those sorts of things, or family members. And those, it's even sort of more crucial to kind of have ironed these things out. I think you want to see entrepreneurs with incredible enthusiasm that they're going to do nothing but be successful and confident, but without being, I can't remember the politic word Jennifer used, but she did. I'll just say over the top. But you also want to make sure that they're being practical. So even if they're married and doing this company and they say, but we're married, we don't need a founder's agreement. It's like, actually, you do need a founder's agreement. So I just think some of those basic relationship pieces get overlooked when we talk about targets and finances and everything else. But those agreements, that honesty and communication between co-founders is really important.
Well, you hit the jackpot with me. When I often will ask entrepreneurs if you could recommend one book to a startup entrepreneur, what would it be? And they say Noam Wasserman's Founders Dilemmas. And I actually use that book in my new ventures course at the Isenberg School. So
that's fantastic.
I've helped him sell a lot of books. Jennifer, unwitting mistakes.
Yeah, for me, maybe two buckets of things. The first bucket is kind of back to that, having confidence, but not being cocky about it. It's claiming that you have no risks, right? That you have de-risked this so much that it is a surefire win. And I don't want to hear that you have no risks. I want to hear that you know what your risks are, and that you've thought about it enough to highlight, manufacturing is a really big risk for me, and here's why, and here's my plan to mitigate that risk. I think that really just shows a lot more maturity and nuanced understanding. You've really thought about it. I think also not really understanding when I'm going to get my money back. At the end of the day, I do this to generate more capital to help more companies in Massachusetts. And so that kind of gets to not knowing what your exit strategy is. And even though you're really early days and you're asking for sometimes your first money, there needs to be an understanding of what money after mine do you need, and where is that going to get you, and what is your ultimate plan here? Who are you? In my world, you either get a partner with a large pharma or med tech company, and if that's your plan, have you had some of those conversations? They don't need to be serious. You're far away, but you need to understand who a potential acquirer could be, and if they find your product even interesting. Or if you're going to IPO, knowing kind of what that plan looks like. So even though it's really early days, you still want to understand the trajectory of your company and what your plan really is, and specifically when we get our money back.
Okay. Matt.
I'm actually going to go back to the founders agreements and target one specific point in that agreement. And I think that founders need to be sure that they subject the shares of stock that they receive in their company to a vesting schedule. And there's nothing worse than a founders group promising a group of entrepreneurs that they're onto something great, and they had signed some agreement where one of the founders got 25 or 33% of the company, and there was no vesting schedule associated with that. He's since parted ways, and that individual walks right away with that full equity stake.
Can you explain kind of how does a vesting schedule work? What's market, and when should I be thinking about establishing a vesting schedule?
Sure. So what a vesting schedule is, it basically just means that when you're issued stock, you receive the full equity grant that is referenced in the agreement, but it vests over time. And the purpose of that is to ensure that you're kind of bound together with your co-founders for at least a certain period of time, at which point you'd be fully vested in that stock. And market would generally be a 4-year period with a 1-year cliff, meaning that once you're issued the stock, you wait a full year. At the 1-year anniversary, you vest 25% of your equity stake, and then you vest on a monthly basis thereafter. And I've seen vesting schedules as long as 6 years and as low as 2 years, but kind of 4 is really the standard. And the time that you think of engaging in these discussions as to when you place a vesting schedule on your equity would be as soon as you start discussing the equity splits in general. I think that it's kind of part of that same conversation. So kind of when you're ready to form your company, that's the time when you talk, okay, who's owning what percentages, what will the schedules look like?
So if I could just say it back to you to make sure I understand. So Matt, if you and I are going to start a business, we're going to be 50-50 partners. And we have this 4-year vesting schedule that you suggest. That means that if I were to leave after year 1, I'd get to keep 25% of my 50%, but then the rest of it would go back into the company that you could use to hire my successor or whatever. Is that how it would work?
That's right. And again, the rationale there is, we want you to get up to this 50%, but in order to get that, you need to be with the company for this period of 4 years, at least, hopefully for longer, but that's kind of the general idea.
And do I want to start it as soon as possible so that when Liz comes to invest in my company and she says, well, is there a vesting schedule? I can say to Liz, yeah, Matt and I put our vesting schedule in place. The clock is ticking. Liz can check her box. And oh, by the way, I've started to accumulate some of that equity along the way. And, that helps me get to my 4-year end goal. Is that?
That's exactly right. And that's another benefit to incorporating earlier rather than later. There are other tax benefits associated with that too, but getting your vesting clock started is a critical point.
Okay. All right. We are at 3:59. Karen, how did we do?
Perfect. Thank you all so much. This was really a wonderful discussion. We are so glad you're here, and we are so glad to have such wonderful partners and supporters. We're hoping that we can send you lots of potential investments.
Great. All right. Well, thanks. And I think we ought to really give a shout out to Lisa and to Karen, who worked hard to put this together and did a great job of picking panelists and great job of picking a moderator. So we got to give them all the credit.
No,
Thank you guys.
That's all the credit, but thank you so much for
All right.
being here. This was really informative.
All right. Have a good day, everybody.
Bye-bye.